Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in. Before I introduce the guests, and I have a great guest for you this week, as always, let me run a few things by you. First, please follow, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It helps boost the show, grow the audience, and ultimately helps me create the best show for you guys. So please go and do that. Additionally, go follow me on social media. I am on both Instagram and Twitter. On Twitter, it's ROY_BNTZ, and on Instagram, it's ROYBTZ. On Twitter, you can subscribe to the newsletter, which gives you access to updates, occasional blog posts, news about the guests, and future of the show. And most importantly, it's just an easy way to get the podcast into your inbox every single week. Finally, please consider supporting this independent podcast. I currently do not work with any sponsors, any companies. I prefer to keep it that way, and I want to keep it independent. So if you appreciate the podcast, if you feel like you get value from the podcast, please consider subscribing. It's as low as $5 a month. Also, one more thing, if you want to start your own podcast, I have a full tutorial that covers everything you need to know about starting a podcast, why you should start a podcast, how to execute, market, reach out to guests, really everything that you need to know about starting a podcast is in this easily digestible and easy to execute ebook that I have on Gumroad. So it's in the show notes. Feel free to check it out. That's it. Thanks for listening to that. Let's move on to the guest. This week I have Ted McDonald, or as he is known more commonly as Barefoot Ted. And if you're looking for just a burst of energy and a stream of consciousness and someone that is just talks unfiltered, Ted is the guy. This was absolutely amazing. We talked for about an hour and a half. He is one of the early OGs of the barefoot running movement. He was in the book by Christopher McDougall, Born to Run. It's probably where a lot of you guys may know him from. And this was just an amazing podcast. I'm sure you're going to dig this episode. And obviously the main the main topic that we're covering is barefoot running. Why, how, who, what, all that stuff. But this goes even beyond that, more existential stuff, Western world stuff, history, culture. Yeah, we cover a wide range, or more accurately, Ted covers a wide range of topics. And I think you're going to be highly entertained by this episode. So why wait? Let's jump right into it. Let me introduce this week's guest, Ted McDonald. Enjoy the episode, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
How you doing, Ted?
Well, dude, I'm stoked to be here. Looking forward to chatting with you. I've done my quick perusal of some of your previous guests and episodes and already got excited. So I'm stoked to be your guest. What can I do for you today, man? I'm in Santa Barbara, California. I'm about to turn 58 years old, and my recent motto is that 60 is the new 21, meaning that, yeah, the world is, I was born July 1st, 1964, which is kind of like an interesting demarcation between baby boomers and the X generation, or whatever we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And one of the things, if you really take that year 64 and then you go forward and you just kind of see the world I've been witnessing. And by the way, in the background here is a drawing my grandma McDonald did in 1972 of me. And I often refer to his eyes and his vision, because he was very much, like any 5, 6, 7-year-old. If you're in the right circumstances and you have a bright mind and you have access to information and you're voracious at accessing it, and it's 1970 and 71, the future you're going to see is way, way better than what you ended up seeing for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And I never gave up on that vision, which was really manifested like 20 days after I was turned 5 in 1969. The first astronauts are on the moon, telling their story. And the big impact of it all at the time was there is one planet. We are all on it. And peace and love and connection and sharing are going to have to be the will be the way to have a great time in this totally awesome world we live in. Was the attitude I had. Like, I want to meet people from everywhere. I want to visit anywhere. I want to learn about anyone. I want to have a good time with everyone everywhere. And look at all these things that exist to allow us to do that. And at that time in Southern California, you know, it's like beach and surf culture are having incredible impact on daily life, on dreaming. And we're getting all about the so much of the surf and skate culture that I became part of that really was the oasis in the village of all the stupid adults, which we just thought were moronic because they wanted to fight and kill and burn. And, you know, they had all the crappy stories. There was like a cadre of us. We were renegades, and we just like at one and the same time, we became smarter than them, we thought, because we were accessing all this new, you know, we were getting this new vision of the world that no one had had before. But we were still not quite capable of understanding how to use that. But we knew one thing, and this is one thing everyone knows deep in their heart. You want spaciousness. You want freedom. You don't want some authoritarian bullies to be telling you what to do, particularly when it's obvious that what they want you to do sucks. So we just learned right away to find the way that made us come alive. And it turned out it was spaciousness. It was the places they were telling us not to go. You know, don't go over there, no trespassing. Well, there's a friggin' perfect slope of concrete there. What do you people know? Nothing. We're going there. Police start coming. We learned how to get away. You know, it's just like all these little tricks that literally you need to learn to be avoiding the bully authoritarians who want to make everybody do lockstep and be all the same, because it's easy to manage people like that. But the truth is, free-flowing people with spacious, open hearts, trust me, California's proved it. We are the 5th largest economy in the history of the world. We're an assemblage of all kinds of people from all over the place, freely interacting. I mean, you know, there's all kinds of shenanigans everywhere on the outside, but the real value-creating element of any great place is a bunch of really free-thinking people trading consensually with each other, creating value and sharing it over and over again. And I think Israel's done a good job. Like, I think California and Israel have a similar kind of logos, you know? It's like great location, get a lot of smart people, give them a lot of freedom to
I don't know about the great location aspect, but yeah.
Well, you know what I mean? I'm talking weather and potential. Yeah. It's like, you turn an oasis into there's oases all over the place.
Yeah.
The sealing deal is the individual and the freedom of them to interact with each other without bullies is the best world possible. We need more nonviolent environments like that. California's sort of kind of done a pretty good job. I think we can all do a lot better. And that's what I'm about. Barefoot Ted is about, let's do better. Let's start by honoring the one incredibly valuable thing that we've been given to manage, which is our own selves. Don't require a lot of paperwork or OKs to do experiments on your own self. And why not do that and see how you can make yourself at the beginning, you know, the ecology of you become something that you are like very, very concerned about and willing to do a lot for before you start trying to like make everybody else do something that may not be the right thing. You know, solve the mystery of yourself. You've got all the freedom, no paperwork to sign, go.
That could be the greatest intro I've ever had on the podcast, bar none. It took 130 plus episodes, but we finally gotten there.
All right. Well, if you like that, we got more coming.
Before we talk a little bit more about you and barefoot running and kind of your journey to where you are today, I was thinking while you were talking, I was actually thinking about a lot of things. But one is, why do you think California, because California is not the first place to have a combination of sunshine and beaches, but why do you think so many things propagated there, like the surf culture and the skate culture and clothes culture?
It's a great, it's a great story. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach it, but one that I can think of off the top of my head is two UCSB science history professors about a decade ago took a class they gave on the history of surfing from a science history perspective. In other words, what sort of like technologies were required in order to create what became surf culture. It's a book they wrote. It's called The World in a Curl. And two professors you see. And there's a video on Vimeo where the one guy at the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum, one of the authors of the book, The World in a Curl, gives a talk about the book, and it's just really great. So in that book, the reason California becomes such what it is, there's a lot of things that are, there's a lot of things that have to conspire to make that happen. And it's very complicated. And indeed, it's an area that I do, like, I have a whole research focus where I'm actually unearthing things that are unknown. I mean, I'm like in the back rooms talking with some historians and other people about parts of California culture that I know that very few other people know. And we're just trying to find ways to tell the story. Yeah. And that area is in, it's surf culture, hippie culture, skate. I've got some jewels. And so I can answer the question. I mean, this is a long answer, but it turns out one big factor, unbelievably, for surf history, as we get to know it, is an incredible, it's technology. And there's like 5 major things that happen at Caltech, California Institute of Technology, and some of the people there. And ultimately, it boils down to certain things that happened during and after World War II, some, various things. So some of these things include like how we went from like original surfboards being giant planks of wood that could weigh up to 100 pounds and required, a super athlete to maneuver, a guy named like Duke Kahanamoku, who Huntington, a famous American booster back in the day, railroad guy, was like getting Duke to come from Hawaii and show surfing demonstrations in Southern California beaches for the first time. So, but it was because
surfing didn't start in California, right? It started in Hawaii, but like it blew up in California, right?
That's right. So the reason why it was so in Hawaii, surf culture had been big because there was because they, and this is the charm. I'm really fascinated by the charm of Polynesian indigenous cultures really had on Westerners showing up on their shores, suddenly seeing these, very, let's say, quote unquote, primitive people who are living way better than any of them ever could have imagined, with these incredible leisure periods and whatnot. Like the Hawaiians, for example, were just super great fish farmers. And so they literally had the capacity to create enough food to create quite a large population, let's say, that was able to have leisure time. And leisure time is as essential for being able to do things like surf. All the ceremonies, let's say, from religious practices all the way through the whole gamut of other kinds of recreational activities that people might do without any intentional, like particularly specifically productive outcome. It's just the thrill of existence, let's say. You need to have a pretty serious, let's say, you have to have a pretty built up, successful strategy for how you're going to make enough food. So when you'll actually have extra time to do something different. And the Hawaiians had figured that out. And so if you've got a lot of extra time and you're wanting to demonstrate your prowess or show the girls or boys or anyone else how strong and smart you are, let me tell you, learning how to surf is a great way to stay fit when you're leisure and also tell the whole world. So the Hawaiians had this situation where these certain winds would start coming each year. So they've got this culture. Who knows how many generations they've figured it out. They got fish farming. They've got one of the disadvantages of some of these indigenous cultures is they're also driven by very, very specific taboos and various kinds of things of when they can do whatever they're going to do and how they can do it. I mean, there's all these underlying things so it's not all, it's not all beautiful. I'm telling you, trust me, the guy who was able to escape from his whaling ship, this guy named Herman Melville, he wrote a book called Typee that was before Moby Dick. And it's a story of a sailor who escapes from a whaling ship where he's being brutalized and his life sucks.
Yeah.
But he escapes and he finds himself stuck in a cannibal society, and it's a true story, and they're basically getting ready, they're taking good care of him and giving him plying him with food and a beautiful woman, but it ultimately is possibly going to lead to a very bad outcome.
Yeah.
And he escapes. Oh, Lord have mercy, I've got to do not disturb him. So he finally escapes, and he writes this story, and literally from that story about his escape from the cannibals, surfing history has its beginnings, I found. And it turns out a guy named Jack London, who's a later early 20th century popular writer. He wrote All Call of the Wild, all this kind of like hardcore, like struggle of existence stuff. He finally made enough money to build a boat because he had, as a kid, had read Typee about this Westerner escaping, becoming part of the cannibals, seeing their great life, but then realizing he needs to escape because he's the next meal on the list.
How did he escape?
He escaped. And Jack London read that story as a kid, finally became successful. His dream was to go there. So he finally builds this boat and he leaves on a trip in 1907 or so. And it turns out it's called the Travels of the Snark, I think. His boat was called the Snark. In this traveling, he wrote essays and basically made a living, right? It's like he was like one of the early guys that can just like go off and he can create his value wherever he is. He's a writer, right? He's a coder, whatever. And he literally prints and writes some of the first great essays that really piqued the interest in people for surfing. And he calls it the sport of the gods. And boy, he was right. He had something there, and after that essay, there was no stopping it. And then the next, he continues on his journey, and it's literally coming back to, it'll all come back to where we are started here.
Yeah.
He's on this journey. He continues on his journey. He's been to Hawaii, read the first, he learns a little bit tries to surf. He does some surfing, writes an essay, Sport of the Gods. Continues on his journey. In his next place, he stops in Tahiti. And as he lands in Tahiti, this crazy hippie dude, proto-hippie dude, Stanford student who was about to die, gives up all Western stuff, wanders into the forest to die naked and basically afraid, that.
Yeah.
And ends up surviving. He ends up like having some epiphany about going, and he literally starts a back to nature movement. He's in Tahiti. Jack London shows up, and they met on the streets in San Francisco back, sometime earlier. Mm-hmm. And he ends up writing an essay called The Nature Man. And both these essays, the surfing essay that he wrote and this concept of the nature man, which was this Stanford student who went back to nature, started just living like somewhat primally. And it had positive consequences for the guy. The guy was basically going to die. His dad was a doctor. He was at Stanford. They were doing all they could for him, and in the end, it required him to basically just completely disconnect from civilization for a while to literally get out of harm's way. Yeah. And that became the shtick for the rest of his life. So I believe in Santa Barbara, I'm living currently on top of, literally, it's called Burton Mound, one of the oldest continuously inhabited beach villages in California, as I started this rant with. And from here, my perspective on California history tells me that, Lord have mercy, let's get more of this in more places. Let's make sure that a lot of cool, free-thinking people have access to information and can share that. And that consensual, free sharing kind of environment is what all the coolest people I've ever studied are always hoping for. It's never the top-down authoritarians that are ever interesting. They're never cool. They can get a lot of shit done if they get onto the handles of power. But the reality is all the cool stuff are self-forming systems that are completely unpredictable, but need at their core a bunch of open-hearted, smart, intelligent, fun people who like to do things with each other when everyone consents. That's my riff.
Why do you think, while you were talking, I was thinking, why do you think there is a fascination with this back to nature, right? Especially in Western culture with all the convenience and technology, and we have food at the push of a button and everything is right there. Like, we've worked evolutionary like 200,000 years to get to this point where now we are pretty much self-sufficient to an extent, right? Everything's convenient, everything's at our fingertips.
Right.
Yet we weirdly in the West, or not weirdly, however you look at it, we look back at like ancient cultures or tribes or indigenous people in South America or Africa, and the way they eat, the way they run, the way they behave, their culture. And there is this weird movement of like, I am unfulfilled. Let me go back and see how these people are doing it, and maybe I can find the answers there.
Well, that's exactly my investigation. So the way a lot of people get to know me is through a book called Born to Run.
Yeah.
By Kristen McDougall. It's a great book. It's sort of, I like to call it my quirky PhD thesis I didn't have to write. Now, it's not a science book per se, but it's got a lot of science in it. And one aspect of it, chapter 25 starts out, Barefoot Ted was right, of course. But then it quickly moves over to Daniel Lieberman, evolutionary biologist at Harvard University, who's like, one of the top current people trying to use evolutionary biology to explain some of our skill sets and some of our capacities. And one of those is this incredible capacity that many people have disconnected from, let's say, is our ability to move across this planet on our own 2 feet, right? We are the combination. There's another guy that comes up in the book Born to Run, Louis Liebenberg of South Africa, who's wrote a book called The Art of Tracking the Origins of Science, something like that. And he really, and this is the theory. The idea is that human beings, and there are people who do this today, one of our strategies for being so successful as a species is our ability to do a kind of hunting called persistence hunting, which is a kind of hunting for big animals that doesn't require even no weapons. Mm-hmm. It's literally figuring out that a big animal, first of all, we have this ability to track using visual cues. Like really great trackers can look at these like little symbols, like imagine like scribbles on a piece of paper that end up being shapes of like letters that end up connecting. This ability to look at shapes on the ground and make determinations about what that is, where they're going, do I want to be involved in doing something with that? And that connection with the ability we are incredibly efficient movers. We can really become, when we tap into this, bipedal creature that we are and tap into the hardware and software of its earliest capacities, you find out that we are the alpha. We really rise to the top and can do some incredible things. So imagine you're in a tribe of about 30 people, you're in a desert environment, and your job was once a month, approximately, you had to figure out how to get about 800 pounds of food on the table so that you would have all this kind of one like a super bonus day.
Sure.
And human beings figured out how to do that, and they still can do that. But so the point you started out with, though, we're in civilization. Do we really want to go back there? I mean, I like to tell people this. We are living in the equity of an endless parade of prayers and hopes and struggles and work we're at the spearhead of just this incredible amount of effort, good and bad, that has constructed basically the shell that we hermit crab like snuggled our rear end into. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that so many older cultures can teach us that we don't have now is just really about connectedness, making sure that we are connected to people, to our body, to our environment. So many of the answered prayers have come with like serious disconnections. Like, yes, we have a refrigerator full of food, but what if half of it or most of it isn't even worth having in the first place? This is the conundrum we're in. I mean, God bless all the wonderful technology that we have. Our ancestors, I very regularly, in order to appreciate what we have and be grateful, I try to get into the mindset of how my grandmother would look at the world today. And I know for a fact, and same with the 7-year-old behind me, we're in a world today that's way, way better, potentially way better than any world we've ever lived before. If you like the idea of free people consenting and trading with each other all over the place. And like today, I have friends I do business with, I have great experiences with people all over the world, in Japan, in Vietnam, in Germany, or whatever. Where 100 years ago, my ancestors were out trying to kill each other and they didn't even know why. Yeah. Right? Come on, folks. That's a big bonus. That's a huge bonus. What I see is this coming world of where at one and the same time, you want to be able to take full advantage of the tools of technology when they allow you to connect and share consensually with others. That's fabulous. When you're not being like, either through algorithms that are trying to tweak you to go this way or state governments that are trying to tell you to go that way or whatever. All those kind of megalithic, sort of a top-down hierarchical, I got more information than you and I'm going to hoodwink you because I'm cynical, because I want to keep everything safe and careful. It's like, forget about it, man. Really, free humans interacting with each other and sharing good information, kind of looking behind the curtains and being free to do that, kind of like have different ideas, not have to be ideologically possessed in order to like have a conversation, being spacious enough to realize there's many different opinions of things. But one thing we all got to agree on is we've got to be able to have those opinions without trying to cancel each other, kill each other, destroy each other.
Well, that's a real problem nowadays.
Yeah. It's a problem nowadays, but ultimately, it doesn't take, any time when things really go haywire, those kind of haywire situations ultimately self-destruct. That's why it's good to be able to sort of know how to be slightly on the outside. You don't always want to be too visible. If there's authoritarian attitudes or styles that start cropping up, and believe me, my God, for example, I just finished reading a book that really explained for me the 60s and the 70s in the United States when they were seriously using drug policies, like for marijuana, let's say, to really, really, man, people complain about all the terrible things that happen to women in the world, and it is truly a disgrace. But I'm telling you, young men are the more screwed up, more cynically abused folks. And back in the day, I had an uncle who somehow gets connected with the Manson story, which a lot of interesting things have come in, and all the shenanigans of state governments trying to do national security and coming up with the most absurd, obscene, and terrible excuses to do terrible things to people, take people's freedom away, and or hoodwink them into doing things they wouldn't want to do because they got busted because they had marijuana. And it's like suddenly you're like taking a young kid who's at a university, he's really bright, and you're going to destroy his future unless he does this, that, or the other thing. It's a bad, bad strategy. Yeah. So I have a lot of hope for the good, because all the cool shit, including this technology we're using here, the people at the backbone, the true people at the backbone of internet culture, networking culture, these are cypherpunks. These are essentially anarchists in the sense of wanting to create as best of an environment where the most amount of freedom can exist without putting too much. Well, there's kinds of attitudes that people have the freedom to express that are just, pathetic and nauseating. But I find the vast majority, when people aren't possessed of some ideology, the real interesting part comes with all these new tools we have to do so much good. Who cares about, these outliers? They're almost like, it's almost like the toxins that need to seep out of a person. It's better to let them get out and then just sort of move them aside.
It's the people on the fringe that are usually the most vocal and make the most noise. But it's the people in the middle that are so scared of the people on the fringe, and they tend to quiet themselves down. So they in a weird way, enhance the people on the fringe because they get more vocal and somehow it seeps mainstream. But I do agree with you. I think like if you're living in a Western country right now, 2022, granted, there are a lot of problems. There's never going to be a perfect world. That will never, ever, ever exist, whatever your definition of perfect is. But it's better than it's ever been on so many different levels, from security to the fact that from food security to financial security to the fact that, I don't know, you were allowed to beat your kids up to like 20 years ago, to the fact that you can say whatever you want about government, to, you know, even like you said about marijuana, now it's legal in most states. To just take any parameter and you're like, oh, okay, like, you know, kids used to be chimney sweepers 100 years ago, like 4-year-olds, right? So anything you take, yeah, kids used to work in the mine. Anything that you take, any parameter, it is pretty much better than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago.
Yeah. And so, but here's where but why we're talking is that even in the face, matter of fact, precisely in the face of all of that value adding and good that has come into the world, which is real, and we're making a strong case for it here, we yet still have probably one of the most unhappy groups of people in the history of the world because of the scourge of depression and anxiety and all the other really new, in a sense that like we have enough time now to bother with all this stuff. And it is the solutions for that aren't coming as quickly and or as easily through the common avenues of how to cure that. Like currently, the way we both feed and medicalize some of the biggest populations in the history of the world is not good. I mean, and you know it, we know it. It's like there needs to be a revolution in that space.
But is this in the U.S. particularly, or is this?
I would say it's, you know, I'm just going to say the U.S. I think the trend is everywhere where we've got to sometimes a lot of the great values that come from these top-down situations, like whether it's the best way or not. Like suddenly the government in the United States decides that we don't want hungry people, so let's come up with a system where we can subsidize farming and make sure that we have an absolute, you know, more than we need of this thing. And that's all great. And we end up having this. The problem is you start getting this cat and mouse game where states who have this monopoly on violence and can tax people and big corporations start, you know, coming, oh, well, you know, corn's really great and we can, you know, oh yeah, and we got all this excellent, but we can put it in the, you know, and then suddenly they're telling everybody this food stuff is the one that's going to make you healthy and here's lots of it and it's cheap. And then the same thing happens with medicine. There's some good ideas and then there's some guys and then there's money that's the government's getting and they're saying, oh, we want to do the good thing. And then, we got this pill. And then, you know, I mean, there's this cat and mouse where in the end, all that ends up creating this glut. We have tons of medicine and tons of food, but now we've got to like redial it in and see like what, and this concept, and by the way, it's back to nature was our theme, right? That's my historical analysis of it in the United States. It goes back to that guy, Ernest Darling, this Stanford student who decides I can't. And a guy I'm researching called J. William Lloyd, he was kind of a doctor. He was in the health field about 125 years ago. He was writing some essays about this concept and they became friends. And really, as a whole movement started that is like coming to full expression now. And what they were trying to do was say, look, here's the modern world. Here are all these new, interesting, and wonderful, incredible tools. Here's this new modality of understanding how we got here. For example, let's say evolutionary biology or other. And then here's all these indigenous cultures. We should be studying, you know, what it is that was valuable about what they were doing and so forth and so on. What about ancestral medicines, particularly, you know, some of the medicines that are what we would call psychedelic or what they call entheogens. There's this whole like series of things that have been part of the entire human experience in indigenous cultures all over the world. And these guys were saying, hey, we got to bring this stuff in and somehow integrate it with all these other new insights that we have. And so it's not really people. In my case, I'm known as Barefoot Ted. I started going on this journey about wanting to solve, how can I become the fittest and happiest, human being that I could be? And I had put in my mind when I was a young person that running must be one of those things, because of a California senator's son did a marathon when I was 20. He was 40, and on his birthday, he did a marathon and had a party. And I thought, holy crap, 40-year-olds can run a marathon? So I thought, I put it in my head, okay, when I'm getting close to 40, I'm going to re-examine this and see if, this will be like my gold star. I'm going to shoot for that.
Sure. So
I'm 58. So about 20 years ago, I started thinking, okay, I got to really seriously apply myself. Now I'm really not feeling as fit as I used to. I'd really like to, now I'm going to use this challenge to see what I can come up with. And so it was that path that led me to the place where I ended up getting to be a character in the book Born to Run, that tells the story of running in this evolutionary biological perspective. I became the poster child of that book because of the internet, and because of this kind of curiosity that we can, start having an idea, having something that intrigues us, being able to go and start, very efficiently finding information that begins to give you insight into that topic better than you ever had before. Now you have this self-experimentation thing. That's my big, what my big suggestion is: use that stuff, man. So as I started. Yeah,
I just want to understand it a little bit better and give the listeners a better feel.
Yeah,
so sure. You're saying 20 years ago, roughly, you started getting into running heavily, but where did the barefoot run? Because a lot of people go running. Majority of them don't decide to do any sort of experiment with barefoot. So I would love for you to explain to people that aspect of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so we just mentioned how sometimes medicine and sometimes food can get, pushed into an area where ultimately you've got a lot of stuff that may not be good.
Yeah.
So same thing seems to have happened in running. What happened in the running world is we started, people started wanting to run further, let's say, or more comfortably. So or some people just weren't strong enough to run in the way that people were running, let's say, before the advent of what became known as a modern running shoe. And it turns out the book Born to Run sort of makes the argument, and I think it is a legitimate argument, that what happened is, just like with food and medicine, we started trying to create too much of a good thing, supposedly, that was benefiting us. And what it turned out is so much of the quote unquote technology of running shoes leading up until the early 2000s was more or less junk science and sort of a misunderstanding of how running works and what human beings' capacity was. Mm-hmm. But so many people had gotten to the point to believing that in order to run at all, that it was literally not something that a human should do. Doctors sort of got into the, people would show up, I'm running, it's hurting, don't run, So, but in reality, what it was a sort of a misunderstanding of what our true attributes or, capacities were.
Yeah.
But more importantly, and this is what Daniel Lieberman showed out, so much of the footwear people were, both how they were growing up and then the footwear they were thinking they should use in order to do this dangerous thing called running, which just happens to be the primal, the survival strategy par excellence of the human being. Da Vinci looks at a human foot and says, this is the preeminently engineered part of the human body. And there's a lot in why. But ultimately, the hubris that suddenly we could just, put a, big, thick, foamy pad here and some yada, yada here and some blah, blah, blah there and put a big price tag on it and have all kinds of people wear it. And then suddenly realize, actually, nobody's getting better from this. And as a matter of fact, more people are getting injured because of this. And it was a combination of poor thinking about what good footwear would be. And then people self-medicate. It's like people often go to the doctor. I saw a commercial, I'm supposed to take blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, here you go. Take it. Yeah. And that's kind of how, and then you'd go into foot stores and they'd say, they had all this lingo about how you were pronating or supinating or blah, 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 or yada, yada. And then they had a shoe to fix this and a shoe for that. And they still do all of that. And that's all fine. In the end, I don't have any problem as long as you're not being forced to buy that stuff. But what I came to the realization, me and many other people, so much of the hardware that was being sold that was supposedly going to solve the riddle for you, eat this and it's, zero trans fat and blah, 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 and yada. And yet we were eating it and going, and in this case, running with it and going, God, in my case, I was just like, I had the best I could get. I was doing a lot of experimenting with the footwear. And it was just like, I was just thinking in my mind, how in the hell do people run more than an hour? How do they deal with it? I just couldn't. So as I drilled down, and as soon as I found out that there was this, and Lieberman had been part of that too, the writing was starting to be on the wall, that there's something specifically wrong about trying to solve the problem of human locomotion by just simply adding bells and whistles to a running shoe. And it turned out if you just started lifting the hood up, let's say, and looking under the hood back in, let's say, early 2000, you would start seeing, oh, yeah, obviously this is not the right direction. And then the first thing I started doing was both with footwear and with human, I had already had a pretty good understanding of some of the capacities of humans with simpler technologies. I had lived in Japan for 5 years. I'd done martial arts, surfing, skateboard. In other words, and I'd already been part of a barefoot culture in a sense. Yeah. So I knew that a lot of things could be done that most people maybe didn't know, but I never had fully gone all the way to see what would it take to run well? Like, what is the primal, perfect running position? How would that feel? What is it like? And, extrapolating from all that, if it was bare feet would be, you'd be working at least with something the foot itself would have to be the technology here. And since I'd grown up barefoot already, I knew that the foot was quite a bit harder. If you used it and had developed some finesse with it, the foot itself was like the tool par excellence in many, many settings. You wouldn't want any foot. There was no footwear good enough to scramble, like a surfer scrambling down a cliffside to get to it. What are you going to do? I mean, flip-flops, maybe that would be the extent of it. But in the end, you trusted your own feet. But once I found, but if you were to run, the problem, what running shoes had done up until that point was make people think the heel was getting more and more padded and thicker. And it just kind of, people maybe assumed, and indeed the type of running that became the hallmark of this kind of shoe is what's called heel striking. And heel striking just does not feel good on hard surfaces in bare feet, right? Or any kind of hard surface. You generally tend to not heel strike. And the only way you begin running.
What's heel striking for people who are not runners?
Heel striking is, just imagine when you're running, it's kind of like the idea that your foot is landing out in front of you on its heel, and then you're going to hit the ground there. The padding's going to help you, and then you're going to pull your foot on through and then continue on down. So all these shoes started developing more and more heel padding, and more people started to, because they had this padded heel now, could suddenly start running with the style with significantly less issues right away. So in other words, if you were running barefooted on a hard surface and you were doing this heel striking motion, it would feel so radically wrong. You would quickly change your gait, shorten your stride, quicken your cadence, and start landing more mid-foot, forefoot, okay? And what Lieberman found, he built this expensive, fancy treadmill at Harvard, and he just started getting people, without any instruction, getting people with shoes, without shoes, to just start running. Here, go up here, start running. And just start measuring where they're landing, what the impact forces are and whatnot. Once you put a shoe on a foot, now keep in mind, a foot is an extremely complex, as I said, Michelangelo is saying, this is the preeminently engineered part of the human body. Yeah. You start looking at it more closely. It's loaded with all kinds of sensory inputs. I mean, all the externals, your fingertips, the ends of your genitals, the tops of your head, your lips, and your feet are filled with information gathering nerve cells. I mean, like literally everywhere. And those that information is like in real time been communicating with your body. There's all kinds of ways to try to understand it, but you can get the idea. It's like a living system that's been part of a ongoing experiment with this human being form that has earlier, expressions than other beings that don't even exist anymore. And it's this endless amount of, to you in your cognitive mind, unknown technology that needs the information that it gathers in order to do the job that it does, right? So the idea, so many modern people wanted to start adding right away before they even understood what the default equipment does in the first place, so that you can determine what would be a valuable addition. So
let me see if I just want to make sure I'm understanding the concept, the idea, because as a kid I used to walk barefoot a lot and I liked it, and then people would like kind of make fun of me, so I started wearing shoes. But like the idea, according to what you're saying, is that the padding on the shoes allows people to run incorrectly, right? Because of that padding. If you remove the padding, if you remove shoes in general, and we can get to like sandals and that kind of stuff in a minute, that in itself allows the person to auto-correct the way they run, thus running better, thus having less issues on potential joints, knees, etc. Is that pretty much it?
I mean, in other words, it's not, now keep in mind that, yes, that's exactly right. Now, okay. However, it does not mean that simply buying that object, right, will solve the problem. Right now, there's even shoes that'll tell you I'm the barefoot shoe, I'm the yada yada shoe, and but if you were to just take that object, it doesn't solve the riddle, right? It's like, it's not. So the more, so they throw a lot of technology in there often, making the consumer think, oh, just like with the food or the medicine, if I take that, it solves all the problems. And that's kind of like the wrong way to approach it, right? It's like a diabetic. Oh, if I take the insulin, then I don't have any problems. I can eat more of the candy. But it's like, no, actually, you don't even have to take the insulin if you do this kind of idea. Okay. And so it's trying to get people to sort of approach it in that way. So what it does mean, though, you have to change what it is that's even motivating you to run it. Well, at least the way I'm trying to package it now is to try to say, you maybe need to just completely re-examine what it means to run, why you even bother to run, how much running, and particularly with running, even though I'm famous for doing ultra marathons, running 100 miles, doing these various things and friends with these kind of people and people using our sandals to do that kind of stuff. In reality, though, what I want to help people discover is what's the smallest effective dose that I can take, in this case, in running and moving, that gives me the greatest impact. So I don't have to wait. I mean, I may want to do, maybe just for the fun of it, I want to ride big waves. Okay. But ultimately, you got to learn how to ride the small waves well first before you try to venture into the big stuff. And ultimately, I also tell people, you want to think of it as you've been given a beautiful, high-performance luxury car, but putting bad fuel in that and driving it harder does not make it better if it's not tuned, right? It just doesn't make any sense. And so many people are trying to solve, they know they need to do something to take care of themselves. And fitness and running becomes and there's races and there's times and there's ways to chart your progress and all the rest. But my Barefoot Ted, as my philosophy is, first start reacquainting yourself, if you haven't, with the primary apparatus. And in the case of running, really reacquaint yourself with making and allowing your foot to come back alive, not necessarily even running, just beginning to let it, like you were doing as a kid, giving adults the freedom and the excuse to spend more time barefooted so they can reacquaint themselves with this underlying information processing system that's got hardware, has software, simply needs to be used to begin to reawaken in a sense. And it's following that riff of reawakening the body that is more important than how many steps, how many miles, how fast, all the rest. I'm starting to try to make that case.
So
Let's disconnect running from like just the performance part of it and reacquaint it with the daily practice of living well that all our ancestors did by default, basically, right? I mean, so many cultures, the first thing you do is you take off your shoes at least when you come home.
Yeah.
You know, you don't wear your shoes into the house.
Correct.
Well, in America, we just overcame that, obstacle. And some people probably sleep with their shoes on. I don't know.
But like, so my question is, if I live in New York City, I should not go outside and run or even walk barefoot. If I live in Arizona, right, where it's 110 degrees, I probably shouldn't go out on the trail because my feet are going to burn. Like where, or like, I don't know, there's places where just, there's rocks, there's dirt, there's so many different things. Where would I go? If I don't have like the feet of someone that's been doing barefoot running for 30 years, if I'm just like, all right, let me go try this out, where would I go?
Well, first of all, I agree with you on some level. Not every. This is the amazing part of the human creator. Yeah. We seem to be able to come up with ways to bring some portable ground with us. So, to your question, once I started realizing, oh wow, it's the form that's a big part of how you can find the solution to moving well in this body you have, and everyone's different. They have. That's the other thing. It's not really a cookie cutter solution. Back to this, your own personal experimentation. Yeah. You're going to know what your history as a kid was, whether or not you had some of these experiences. Because if you didn't, it's going to be a larger road. It may not. But ultimately, the other side of it is human beings, and this is where I really started riffing, and this is how I got to sandals. Human beings have been faced with this same problem all throughout time everywhere, right? So what have been the natural selection features of footwear in human cultures that weren't like automatically assuming that their foot is broken by default and they've got to come up with some kind of like orthopedic and medicalized strategy to just become a human being again? They didn't have that baggage to deal with. And indeed, probably most indigenous cultures throughout history, if you didn't fit into a robust, I'm able to build my toolkit of survival, I can do all these things there wasn't a lot of room for survival there. So you were probably quick and fast at adapting to the strategies that you need to do to be able to survive. And all these simple footwear traditions exist all over the world. Yeah. And it kind of goes like this. If you don't need a shoe, no shoe is made. If the best solution is literally your own foot, you don't have a tool, you don't need to add anything. And then it starts getting really basic stuff, but it would come very early. In my own experiments, you really quickly learn there's situations where it's suddenly not becoming comfortable anymore, too hot, too rocky, brambles, too cold, whatever. So solutions come fast and furious and easy for human beings. I'm telling you, it doesn't take a lot. I mean, you're walking in a hot place and it's rocky and your feet are starting to ache and you somehow step in some manure and then step on some hay. And suddenly you start realizing, oh, I can augment my foot in some way. And what all the, let's say, natural selection of footwear strategies do, they don't work with the premise that the foot itself needs to be reconstructed. They come up with the least amount that can solve the problem at hand then. And it ends up, a simple sandal ends up becoming like ubiquitous, right? I mean, really everywhere, that becomes the first choice when you're on that liminal line between the desert and whatever, all these places where the thorns and it gives you a huge advantage when you're trudging through the deserts or trudging on the coast or hunting an animal or whatever, to have a little bit of something that allows you to do what the animal, suddenly there's these areas where you're going to go, but that big guy can't go there because the sand's too soft or it's too mucky or and we always came up with tools, the barefoot being the best. But once I started realizing that simple sandal, and it kind of was a series of things, it turns out the people who still do this persistence hunting, I mean, it's getting down to the last of the people in the world who do it, are the San people of South Africa, and they might be our oldest human ancestors in the sense that, in that way of looking at the world. And then there was this other group, the Tarahumara, or the Raramuri people, the running people of northern Mexico, which just happened to be on the border of California, basically. So I started like reflecting on who can I go see who will be part of a living tradition where this simple footwear is still, the survival tool. And that's how I got down to, and the book covers it, to the Copper Canyons of northern Mexico, where this group, the Tarahumara, the Raramuri people, are still existing. And as a cohort, they just happen to be among the greatest long distance mountain runners in the world. So I got like super intrigued. And in 2006, I finally found my way down there. And it just happened to be a perfect storm where me and a bunch of other ultra marathon runners and a great writer end up having like an incredible, the book Born to Run is well worth reading because of the narrative that's behind it that leads to these ideas being presented in such a cool way. And it's like, and that's where I like suddenly made a commitment. And this is where surfing culture and sandal culture to me combine. Like as a kid growing up, I wanted to be a surfboard president or a skateboard all the cool companies were actually California companies that were making the clothing, the surfboards, the skateboards and all. And so I had this dream as a kid, I'll be a skateboard president someday, Well, it turns out sandals to me end up being that. Sandals really are that magical platform that allow us to bring a little piece of portable ground with us that allows us to sort of explore that territory like you were describing outside, your apartment in Brooklyn or, on the desert sands or rocky trails of Arizona or on and on. And so I created a footwear company and we are now like really, we became a worldwide, we're still just a small little niche, right? It's like a niche, but we
Luna
opened
Sandals,
up.
right?
Yeah, Luna Sandals. We opened up a little space that was kind of everywhere at one time in history. I mean, it's not unusual to have people wearing sandals in places where a shoe is too much and a barefoot is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to create that company and then in that space, kind of like surfers making surfboards, it's really great to have people making stuff and they actually use that stuff. Like it's great to have a violin maker making a violin or a surfer making a surfboard or a person like me in my company where our sandals are all about being able to do the stuff we like to do. And an example of that is like a couple weekends ago, I did this really cool thing. I'd never done it before. There's this guy named Matt Graham. Okay. He has a television show, I think, called Dual Survivor. And then another guy named Dan Baird. These like guys that are into like the old school survival stuff. And there's all kinds of shows. I don't have a TV, but I know about their stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated so I went on a 3-night, 4-day desert survival run. And we went into this area in Utah called Escalante. Like it's those desert canyons and they're like super complex terrain and all this. And we went in there basically with nothing, with not enough to survive for 4 days in the desert. And with this guy leading us and all in sandals, basically. And we just like lived as if we were, at that time, 200, 305. And it is remarkable how, if you know what to look for and you know what to do, the same skills that go into making the magic mirrors that we're talking through now, right? The computer coders and all the various people that need to do all the cool things to make modern civilization succeed, those capacities to look at the world and solve riddles, find answers, exist in our primitives, like basic default state. So when you start using the same tools and applying them to a natural environment that you become an expert on, we were just perfectly fine with this guy, Matt Graham, and what looks like nothing could be possibly good happening here. Suddenly we were learning these little tricks and all those little tricks. I mean, so it was nice to be totally disconnected, no touch cell phone, no nothing. And
so were you hunting out there?
Yeah, we had to catch things. We had to, we did. Wow. So in the end, what you learn is to survive is a full-time job.
Yeah.
It like you can do it. It's greatly satisfying to be able to do it, but you quickly start realizing why our ancestors dreamed technology into existence, why they chose to go to a white box and open it instead of just every time always have to go out. So ultimately, though, and this is in order to become a fit, vital person that is filled with well-being and happiness, you gotta have those connections. It's this disconnected life that seems to create environments where we get so in our head that we, end up being, it's like the autoimmune disease. We destroy ourselves because we have all these capacities that need some kind of enemy or some kind of difficulty to overcome it. So my life these days, living in Santa Barbara, kind of ensconced in beach and surf culture and wanting to extrapolate why that's so valuable, it's because I realize we need to create environments and recreations that are connecting us as people. And I think a lot of the races have been doing that up until now. But those are the equivalent of pilgrimages or going to a temple or a shrine or a holy spot. It's really, in the end, creating meaningful connections with people and doing meaningful things that are valuable for your health of you and your family and your world. Yeah. And I think barefoot running, or just getting reacquainted with the human, and really gratified and try to find to make it better, is an incredibly great. Everyone listening has this vehicle, this meat puppet they're inhabiting. Getting to see that not as a broken and damaged and endlessly problematical, that's the endless story is that. That's what we're constantly. But there may be little tiny things that are available to you right now that many other thoughtful thinkers in the last 150 years have noticed and experimented with that are so simple and available. Just spending a little bit of time outdoors in your bare feet, breathing with some sun on your face, is something many people do not do. Now, can you do it in Brooklyn? Get up on the friggin' roof, man. Whatever. Get a chance every day to just get some connection to that world. And then with people, I really want to find more opportunities to create events where people are coming over together and, having some reason to celebrate. In races are the things right now, but I'm really getting excited about sort of like pilgrimages, like using old routes that were used in religious contexts before, and just using that hardware to sort of like, really, in the end, what I'm finding about these events where people get together and do big things, whatever, is, and also in pilgrimages, there's a great book, Canterbury Tales. It's a book about, pilgrimages in England back 14th century. And it's amazing when you get people together and walk and move through space together. It's like group therapy. People, they're no longer, ideologically possessed. They're suddenly all together having to make their way through a natural landscape. And it's this interactions with people in an open-hearted way that you don't know, in an environment where you're all sharing for the first time. I see so much good coming out of that space that I'm like compelled to want to like encourage more people to do that. But the sandal company itself is just compelling people to make that experiment. Hey, maybe I don't need as much all the time. Maybe I should give my foot a little breathing space here. And Luna Sandals is about sort of like giving people the chance to like, go ahead, go to the beach, wear a bikini, don't wear a giant, canvas sack. Go ahead, a little honesty, a little protection, wear a bikini, but get out there in the world, folks. Don't be so invulnerable.
That's what I want to understand, because I've seen I'm completely a novice in anything barefoot, but barefoot people use sandals, and sandals is essentially, I looked at the thing, it's the same kind of Vibram type soles that most running shoes have. So is the idea that it's thinner, or the idea just that it's open and maybe gives, more access to sunlight? Like what? Because I don't really see like a big difference between, one of those minimalistic running shoes to a sandal, just from like a outsider perspective.
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, so some of that whole minimalist shoe movement, I've been playing a role in it since the very beginning. It's like, I wore those so when I was experimenting with barefooting, I started realizing, oh, well, there's, as I just mentioned, there's this whole indigenous history of natural selection of footwear.
Mm-hmm.
And at about the same time, I suddenly see, and I'm starting to realize, like, some of the things that I want to do, 100-milers, longer distances, trail run, you're gonna have to have, in most cases, some kind of footwear. So I'm doing all this research on this natural selection of footwear, and I'm discovering all kinds of interesting things there. But then suddenly, in like late 2005, early 2006, Vibram has developed a toe shoe called the Five Fingers.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to do with it. They're thinking it's a boat shoe, this and that. And that's when I enter the picture and say, whoa, hey, this is like, actually, because I would do barefoot. I had worked up to being able to do barefoot marathons. I mean, it's the technique that's allowing it. Okay. And so, but then I'm realizing, oh, I'm going to need more. But I'm a good person to be able to test this theory. So, hey, I wrote the company, said, let me try that. I ended up running the Boston Marathon in 2006, and I literally set my watch to cross the line at the same time I needed again to requalify, and I literally crossed it at that time.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, oh, wow, this is cool. This is a great tool. The problem was it suddenly became like, oh, I just buy that shoe and I'll be like Barefoot Ted. And it was like, no, not exactly, right? What the sandal why I ended up going to the sandals, and by the way, I'm developing a shoe. Back in the day when the Five Finger came out, I realized that is a great idea. It's like something somebody can buy. So it has some kind of like transactional value.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make something. There's an object. The problem was, at that time, the idea that you just buy that shoe and now everything's okay, but it was really the form. But at that very time, having these individual digits, nobody's feet are the same. It's like really complex to try to do that. And I thought it was very hard and a little bit too faddish. So my research had already led me to realize there had been a Japanese runner in 1950 who won the Boston Marathon, and he had run in a tabby shoe. But in 1950s, the United States, a tabby shoe is like a mitten shoe. It has the just like your hand. It's really good to have that secondary flexion point because it's giving you information about how your foot is laying on the ground below you. Right? You don't think about it, but when your toes here and your feet are, there's all this information that's being gathered and allowing your body, even before it reaches the brain, lower spinal column, is allowing the body to do things that it can't do if it doesn't get that feedback. And that's what, by the way, Lieberman found that. You let people run on that treadmill in their shoes, and the variability of their gait is just everywhere. There's just it's because it's almost like, look, I'm going to teach a kid how to play a piano. Now, if I give him oven mittens and I have him go at it, he's going to turn it into a percussion instrument. There will be no nuance.
Yeah.
He won't, there'll be no nuance. What reestablishing a concrete connection to a functional foot is all about ultimately is regaining nuance in the foot. Much of it you don't even know is there because it's pre-conscious nuance that happens because of structural things and nerve things that are in this complex thing called your foot. So what the sandal tries to do is it meets in the middle. Mm-hmm. It gives you a piece of portable ground that's going to follow you. So it itself doesn't have to be as flexible or as it just needs to allow the foot on top of it to feel comfortable enough to be able to do all the things that a foot naturally should do. And that's splaying, that's, the toes. When you hit the ground, if your shoe's in a narrow toe box, then all these forces that would normally dissipate out through the splaying of the foot and other things that happen get trapped and focused and leveraged into joints and other things that just wouldn't happen if you allowed the foot to be and then just the flexing and moving of the foot, the cooling of the foot, air on the foot. So all of that. And then there's this other tiny little, but nonetheless important, and you'll see what I mean in a second. If you're barefoot, you're also extremely vulnerable. So this incredibly complex being that's risen to the alpha top of hunters and, species on the planet has a capacity that allows it to do this persistence hunting, yet its foot is extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
So what is required is a much more mindful, present, thinking creature that can tune into where it is while it's there and actually learn how to turn a keyboard of white and black keys into a thing that actually makes music sing, right? And that's what happens to the foot. You're vulnerable. You have a complex terrain. You move through it in such a way that you begin to develop a strategy of movement that turns what looks if you're a robot and you don't have this nuance and you don't have this nuance, you've got to sort of, you kind of plod through it, and you just, if you're a human being, man, there's a musical element to movement. There's this like combination of you've got to be there in order to experience what it's like. It's like a surfer. He's got to figure out a way to get into that one place. And it's not easy. And many people never even get there. But once you're there and you can do that, oh my God, you're just, once you feel what it's like and you begin to develop that sort of strategy of moving in such a way that it feels good and that it's palpably good and that you're getting stronger and better with use, because that's one of the functions of these self-forming systems, biological systems. They have this incredible tendency to be anti-fragile. If you use them well, they get better with use. It's like people would say, Barefoot Ted, what kind of shoe? What's the best shoe? How about a self-healing, get stronger and better with use, with nanotechnology and direct, integration with the brain? It's like all this kind of stuff. It's like the foot is it. And so finding ways to do the least amount to it that allows it to still be comfortable to go and kind of explore some of the more complex terrains or harder, that's what I'm all about now. So, but in the end, anybody can wear them. And I found out now that in reality, the truth is you don't have to run endlessly to be fit through running. You don't have to just go and you don't have to be hard on yourself. I swear to God, I think a half mile, literally, done well, maybe in bare feet, is like, it's a great microdose that does so much good in so little. And more than one person I have done research on took that kind of idea and built a whole lifetime on it. And I can look at their life and look at what they did. And that's, to me, that kind of research, you can kind of see my strategy of like filling out my curiosity is, I'm not just looking for modern day scientific yada yada reports. People have been experimenting on their bodies from day one. They didn't have to validate everything. That what they had to do though was survive. And ultimately, if they were really good, and some of them left their stories, some of them found a way how to thrive. Mm-hmm. They found a way to turn living not only into an endless survival game, but they learned how to do all the cool shit that allows us to do what we're doing now. If you didn't have a crap ton of people thriving, you wouldn't have a magic mirror like this we're talking in with all the code and all the cool shit that created that environment required thriving human beings. So here we are. Let's keep thriving.
Is there any connection between barefoot running and earthing?
Yeah, so that's a very, it's kind of trendy. There's a little bit of a marketing thing on the concept of earthing, but I don't think it's bogus. I don't think it's bogus per se.
It's probably somewhere in the middle, right? Like it's not all that's cracked up to me and all that it's promised, but it's not completely fake. It's probably somewhere in the middle.
No, it's somewhere. No, it's kind of like this. It's an absolute fact that a lot of people in modern living can find themselves in a situation where they're never, ever standing on the ground. They're never grounded. They're just always insulated from the world. I mean, and I'm talking insulated from all the microcurrents and they're just like, we're in all these artificial ungrounded. And I think there's some evidence that suggests, let's say intuitively, so many practices that end up often being religious or connect. The first thing you do is you take off your shoe, Mm-hmm. Suddenly Moses is in front of the burning bush. It's like, take off your shoe, man. This is sacred ground. It's like, there's something about fundamental about making sure every day or in some way you're finding yourself connected.
Yeah.
And it's beyond just a simple, it's just, there's something about it that you don't, it's like, is evidence necessary? Well, sure, if you can give me some, that'd be great. If it's just a marketing strategy, though, that it's not like you have to be grounded all the time.
Yeah.
But you do just want to make sure at some point in your day or some point in your, regularly, you're fine. That's the message I'm trying to get. Just make sure you get some of these booster shots. Vaccines are the big thing these days. Well, let me tell you something. A natural human being moving through the natural world every day is basically vaccinating themselves continuously. You're getting little microdoses of all the various things that are in your environment. You're getting sunlight, so you're creating enzymes that are going to be extremely helpful in making you healthy. You're breathing deeply and oxygenating the system, and you're freeing your mind of the oppressive, endless problems that you might have when you're back in the regular space. And people who have come up with strategies that make that a practice every day, let me tell you, man, however they do it, whatever you do, you need to find something like that for you. I mean, It's like, that's my message to people.
It's very true. It's like, and again, this isn't going to solve all your problems, but it could solve a lot. Like because what you do, majority of people, right? Just take the average person. Now, maybe not so much because offices are not becoming obsolete, but people are doing a lot of remote work, but still they're at home a lot. So you're in a confined place outside of sun. So you're not getting sunlight, right? And then you're in shoes majority of the time, which is fine. And then you're not eating healthy a lot, right? And you're not getting air. So you're not going to the beach. You're depriving yourself of a lot of things that if you were just do them, go eat organic vegetables or really good food. Go outside, get an hour of sunshine. Go run outside. Go, I don't know, to the beach if you have access to the beach. If not, go to the mountains.
Or it's any lake, any park, any trees.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
where you can fill your eyes, and you can do it in New York. Fill your eyes with something that's not man-made.
And it's interesting, like when you I remember I did this a while ago. I haven't done it in a while. When you go bare feet on like grass or any sort of, natural terrain, not on concrete, obviously, sand, whatever it is, it's like, ooh, this is interesting. It's like, it's a weird sensation because it's not something you're used to. It's not something you do often. So if you do walk on grass or anywhere, it's like, oh, this is nice. And you kind of like put your feet into it and I move around. It's an interesting sensation. People should definitely do it. I'm not saying you have to do it all the time, but once in a while, it's fun.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, it's just getting people to, in any way that they can, reacquaint themselves with the hardware of their own body.
Yeah.
Whatever perspective they take in, it doesn't matter from a religious to a scientific, any perspective. When you look at a human body, you must be confronted with something that's just finding, so that people are mesmerized by the fascination of the complexity and the mystery of the very thing they embody. And then finding a way to make that thing respond in a way that it's getting vitality and it's having more and more pleasant experiences and being able to be able to do more good and to interact with other people in a positive way. This is what it's all about, man. It's like being able to, it's like Naval Ravikant talks about, if you're rich and you haven't got that, you got nothing.
Yeah.
He has it's like, a calm mind, a fit body, and a house full of love. These are not bought. These are earned.
Yeah.
And so encouraging people to really understand the one most valuable thing they'll ever have, beyond everything else they'll ever manage, is their own self. And so take that shit seriously. And there's some simple things that you can do to make it better. And what we see is right now in our world, just a gigantic, unbelievable amount of wasted treasure going into depression, anxiety, addiction. And so many of those things are just because so many of us are disconnected from our bodies and from our the ecology around us and the people around us. And it doesn't take a lot. So I just want to, and the more you do it, so that's why finally I'm coming back to the 60 is the new 21. I want to get people off of the bandwagon. We're in a whole new space here, folks. this is a whole new world where there's a lot of stuff that many of us don't know about yet because it's not being promulgated, marketed, or it's new, it's cutting edge. But most of the information that I'm seeing today, I get to be a pioneer in some way because I'm older now and I've been looking at the world a long time. I'm not at all concerned about the future in the sense that I think it's a dystopia. I mean, everything's possible. I mean, anything's possible. But what I'm trying to suggest is one possibility, starting with yourself, is you can get into a state where you're getting stronger, feeling better with age, and that you are beginning to, I'm starting to realize if 60 is the new 21, that also means that at 21, most people in the old paradigm were at the beginning of the best that they were going to be for some small period, and they'll be making some great contributions that will ultimately be valuable for their retirement when they reach 60. What I'm trying to say now is 60 might be the time when you can finally, if you preserved your health and you've kept your curious mind, you are now in a position, I think, to vote better than any 21-year-old could in what would be the right thing to do, what would be where you should invest your time, money, energy. And I feel like, as being 58, I feel like I'm getting close to being, let's say, mastering the human condition as it's been given to me.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited. I'm like, I truly think that I live one day at a time, but ultimately I want to always be just getting rid of what they call nocebos. It's an opposite of a placebo. Somebody in authority, a medical person, yada, yada, says this, that, and the other is going to happen to you because this, that, and the other. And probably much of the time they're probably right. But by just saying that, it becomes right for some people.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to tell you, don't assume that all your chronic illnesses. Lieberman writes another book, The Story of the Human Body. And he comes up with this concept of mismatched diseases. And it's like so many people are plagued with what he calls mismatched diseases. They think that it's just their evolutionary, this is what's going to happen to them because they're a human being. And it's like half the shit people think that's going to kill them and it's part of the human condition and they're screwed because they were born a human. Most of that shit is bullshit. These are self-caused, civilization-caused diseases. And that's why we need to go back to nature. Not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to get rid of these people, these nutritionism and these scientisms and these people these authorities and these states that think they got it all figured out. Get in line, we'll give you the shot, we'll give you the pill, shut up, get in line. It's like, no. You don't even understand what the human condition is yet. And you're trying to tell me that this is the way it's going to go? No. People need to get back to the basics. And the basics is make your body as healthy and vital as you can. A healthy, vital body is a middle finger to depression and it's a middle finger to viruses. I mean, it's like, a healthy, vital body is an unstoppable thing. Get one of those first. See if you can get one of those first and then add all the other things later.
Well, that's all I was just about to ask you that. Like, you are, as you said, 58. For people who can't see, you look like you're in your 40s and you've kind of given us a whole lot of insights and nuggets of wisdom. But I guess you kind of distilled it. I was going to ask, like, what's the secret at 58? Because everyone that's listened to this, you are an abundance of energy. And like you said, you look like you're 15 years younger. So is that really it, what you just said? Is that the fountain of youth?
Yes, I would say that the results, that's why I'm building up some more confidence in this message.
Sure.
I'm an evangelist in the sense, what's an evangelist? It's somebody who just can't help. This is how I sing. This is the music that I hear. But it's the way I've been enacting myself for a while now. And what I can say is it was a conscious decision when I was starting to, when I was like reacquainting myself, 40s coming up, I need to, there was this guy that did the marathon. I need to see it sort of crack this nut. And the marathon was representing fitness and well-being. I was assuming that would be, that must be it. And so all that, but in the end, it's been, I've been given the opportunity, and then I created the sandal company in 2009 officially. So I've had this business that's also been sort of building and maturing at the same time. So I've been like applying myself in all these different areas.
Yeah.
And I really think that's a smart thing. I published a story in Chicken Soup for the Soul called The Roots of Barefoot Ted. And it started with a quote from Howard Thurman, who was Martin Luther King Jr.'s mentor. He was a Black Baptist mystic, very unusual combination of things.
Yeah.
Grew up in segregated South, but really had some powerful messages. And the one that he had that grabbed me was, he had this quote that I used at the beginning of that little story, which was, don't ask what the world needs. Instead, ask what makes you come alive and do that. Because what the world needs are people who have come alive. Yeah. And it's really this vision of his that people, and I was just getting into the game theory thing with altruism, but it's like this idea of find what it is that is inside of you that you need to solve, that calls you, that you can't help but want to pursue that, whatever that is. Do that. Because two things will happen. Your process of trying to understand that thing that you want to do is going to be a joyride. You're doing it because something deep inside of you that we can't even understand what it is, some kind of spark, has intrigued you. You need to follow that lead. That's the thing that's exciting about being an individual. You need to solve that mystery for yourself, because if you get to be an expert at solving that problem in yourself, it's undoubtedly certain that there are other people who will benefit from these insights you've gained. And you might be able, and vice versa, and so forth and so on. I just love that story of human connection, where we're all just trying to find a way to express that thing inside of us that's the curiosity, the thing that makes us come alive, and indeed find out that it turns out it's a lever. If you can solve that problem, you can lift a lot of us up together with that same energy. And that's what we've been doing over and over and over again. And when that's done with a open heart and not cynically, if you're not just trying to like win the game at the expense of everyone else, and indeed you've begun to imagine this concept of the plus sum game. And I truly am a strong believer in the idea that you don't have to screw somebody else to better yourself. That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. It took a lot of wind out of people's sails. Like when I was a university student, the only kind of like, I was there because I wanted to deconstruct the terrible mess that I saw the world in. And some of the answers I was being given really basically just made the argument that, yeah, it is a fucked up world. And you got to deconstruct it and, all so forth. But in the end, I wasn't seeing any good, great solutions. This concept of game theory and trading and incentives, games that are incentivized to be infinite games, I'm fascinated by those. And indeed, one of my heroes these days is a guy named Bram Cohen. I don't know if you've ever heard of Bram Cohen. Have you heard of him?
No.
There's a software called BitTorrent that he invented out of his own head about 12 years ago. Yeah. Indeed, Bitcoin was made in homage to BitTorrent because some of his friends were in that realm. And indeed,
I used to use it.
Yeah. Well, he came up. He's been in the middle of that world. He came up with a really, and I'm a farmer and I have been since January last year. He came up with kind of like the next, and I'm fascinated by money, by the way. I'm fascinated by trading mechanisms that are trustless and trustworthy at the same time, and that are disconnected from nation state. I mean, I was fascinated by Bitcoin. My story is I mistakenly back in 2011 sold a pair of sandals to a guy named Griff Green, who offered me Bitcoin or weed. And the story is, I lost an opportunity to sell a very expensive pair of sandals. That's all I got to say about that. But that being said, Bram Cohen is definitely somebody people should pay attention to. He is, I would say, one of the most intelligent programmers, cryptographers, cypherpunks out there in the world today. He's been brilliant for a long time. And he created a company called Chia Networks that is totally the most interesting thing I've ever seen in my life as far as when it comes to money. And I've been tapping into that. And I'm what's called a farmer. He wanted to solve the problem of decentralized cryptocurrencies, but he also wanted it to be clean, i.e. not energy inefficient like Bitcoin and some of the other proof of work concepts are. And he used his genius mind to work it out. So I mean, there's nothing to sell there, by the way. It's just, it is the most I mean, I was one of the first power sellers on eBay. I was one of the first users of Google. I've been, I was writing about virtual reality when I was a student at UC Berkeley in the late 80s, early 90s. I'm not very smart in the sense I've never been able to invest in anything beyond my own stomach, more or less, sort of, kind of. But because I always felt money was so dirty and there was so much about it I didn't like. But I'm much more fascinated by it these days. And I actually see some of the coming digital currencies that'll be as tools, let's say, to even do more good by being able to get investments and other people who are in positions that can't invest in the big sort of like, trading houses and this and that. The future will be that investments will be so inexpensive and so secure, let's say, that a guy in Africa on a cell phone could be doing some kinds of trades on markets all over the world. And if he's clever enough to know what to do, he can benefit from that cleverness. I'm looking forward to that world that's coming where half the people in the world don't even have a working currency, let alone the idea of a bank account or the ability to trade or do anything with money. I'm looking forward to the monies that are coming that are going to open up all that other creative space, all those other people who are still looking forward to the prayer being answered of their ancestors. Not all of us, we're all, like I said, we're trust fund babies that, just like all trust fund babies, have the terrible trauma of having to figure out what to do with their lives because it's all been provided for them already, kind of, so to speak. We're in that case. It is so many, and I'm poor, right? It's like, but still, poverty is way overrated in the United States, let's just say. And half the people, are way better off than they know. That's a big problem. But some people don't even have the basic nuts and bolts of living, and they want to have those nuts and bolts. And I kind of totally am stoked at being able to see what kind of great things will come. I saw the internet come from 0 to 100, and it made quite a difference. The big problem is it started getting centralized again. And I think the Web 3.0 and more decentralization is necessary to keep the cynical authoritarians from having too much power. They are totally enamored of being able to figure it all out. And the wonderful thing about humans is you can't figure it all out. Don't even try. That's so stupid, man. Who wants to be Stalin if you could get a 20 million people to do something you want, and in the end, all you do is have 20 million dead people? It's no good. Not a good method.
I think Stalin is a good point to end the conversation on.
No Stalins, please. We had enough. We saw it doesn't work, folks. Turn around. Go back.
Ted, this was a lot of fun, man. Thank you so much. I had a blast.
Oh, dude, I really appreciate you for allowing me to riff like that. I hope your listeners will, enjoy sort of like a tour into Barefoot Ted's mind.
Stream of consciousness.
Stream of consciousness. It's not for everyone, kids, but I hope you can get a nugget or two out of there and apply it to yourself.
Where can people find you? Where are you most active on?
Well, I'm really proud of lunasandals.com. So that's, it's a business, but it's a good one. And if you ever get to hankering for some sandals and you want some good stuff, we do it. Barefootted.com. And I, all the regular, I need to write more. I need to take more time to sort of, bring to harvest some of the cool ideas that I have, but it turns out it's just too much work. It's like, I'd much rather be an improvisational jazz musician and just like let it out like I did there and let people sort of like, whoa, what the hell happened there? And see what makes them come alive in that face. But yeah, I have some cool stories. I'm looking for a way to tell more of them. And I mean, follow me on the socials for now, but maybe someday in the future, I'll have something more grand. Maybe I'll have some kind of event where you can come, everybody can come to Santa Barbara and we can have.
Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah. And yeah, maybe we'll do this again in the future, man. So this was a blast. I really appreciate your time today. And I'm sure the listeners did as well.
Right on. Well, I look for, by the way, I'm going to be listening to some of your earlier. I'm going to go finish my game theory one, which I have going on right now.
That's a good one.
That's like right up my alley.
Awesome, dude. All right, man. Thanks again.
Thank you, man.
Take care.
Have a great rest of your day.